latest top tips, reviews and advice, please subscribe below.
Hello and welcome to Attwoolls Outdoors with me, Mike. Today I'm giving you guys a bit of an advice video really about getting to know your new tent or a new awning. So it's all very excited actually buying something and then getting away and getting to try it out. So the first thing and probably most importantly I would say is before you go away on your holidays, put the tent up. Put the tent up, have a practice run with it. Now the reason this is so important is because it's going to do one of multiple things. Firstly, it's going to get you used to your tent. Have a practice row, you can have a go at pitching it in a controlled environment. You're not necessarily relying on it as well, and it means you haven't got everyone else on the campsite kind of watching you and seeing how you go. So this is the number one thing that I'd say when you've got a new tent, have a go at putting it up. What this is also going to allow you to do is not only familiarise yourself with how it goes up and the process. When you come to the second time around on the campsite, it means you'll probably be at half the time because you know exactly what to do and almost get a bit more idea of what in what order. But more importantly, it's going to allow you to check your product that you've just purchased. The reason I say this is because it comes in sealed up, boxed up, ready to go, directly in from most retailers and out to you. There's no guarantee that everything you need should be in there. For argument's sake, there always can be manufacturing defects from production points or even missing items. So if, for example, you go up to turn, you drive 3 hours down to your campsite, go put a tent at the first time and find out you're missing something like a pump or pegs, you kind of scupper at that point. Suddenly you've got to go for a hassle and have a bit more stress of kind of sorting that issue out. Whereas you do it well in advance, if there's a problem with it, you can get back to the retailer and go, look, I'm missing this, this or this. You've got plenty of time and lieu and we get that problem resolved straight away rather than causing more stress and all minute last minute. So that's where that is a big thing. And again, it is your accommodation. You want to make sure that essentially you've got somewhere to stay where you can you can put yourself and get a good night's sleep. It's just basically limiting risks at all points throughout kind of your camping experience. And like I said, from a manufacturing point of view, for all we know, there could be a missed seam, there could be a stitching problem, there could be a beam problem, a pole problem. By testing it before you go away, you make sure that hopefully you start the trip off right. And I'd also say, to be fair, certainly when it comes to the materials, depending if you've got a polycotton or polyester, it gives you the prime opportunity to test the product. So not only from a physical pitching point of view, but anything when it comes to kind of a polycotton fabric is a more natural material. And you have to go through kind of a wearing process. Admittedly, some polyester tents will have to do this for the seams as well. So it's a great practice to do. And again, another reason why you should pitch your tent. So the reason why it's important with polycotton is because you've got a polycotton tent, it needs to go through this weathering process. Traditionally, we've seen it with sort of cotton canvas tents where the material has to get wet. Essentially, the cotton element to it swells up, plumps up and seals itself. So it essentially, the first time it gets wet, potentially let a little bit of water in, but once it's dried out and it's properly sealed itself, then you're perfectly fine to go away. And again, you don't really want to be doing this with a polycotton tent when you're away camping and actually living in the product. It's much easier and simpler to do it, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the biggest garden to do it. Even if it's potentially you go to a park, get a hose pipe on it, let it get natural rain. The crucial thing is when you've pitched it, you want to make sure it gets absolutely sodding wet. The more wet you can get it, the better. As it dries out, you want to allow it to naturally dry out, and once it's dry, pack it away and it's good to go. So typically, as I say, it's very important for polycotton. Polyester it is to a certain extent, and what you can almost do is almost just double check that it is waterproof. It should be, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Other things to bear in mind is actually now we've talked about kind of the materials and kind of what to look out for. Other things is the structure itself. So whether you've got poles, it's almost worth double checking that all the poles are where they should be, and then not for some reason the cord is kind of broke in terms of transit. When it comes to air, it's getting yourself familiar with kind of the air system, how it inflates, how it deflates. Now, each individual brand often use different valves. I'm going to use basically there's 3 different valves we're mainly going to focus on and showing you how it works and also kind of how you can troubleshoot it a little bit. So the first one is probably the most common valve on the market, is what I would typically call a Boston valve. So essentially you've got kind of a screw part to it, as you can see here. Now, you've got kind of a big side and a little side. So the main kind of Boston valve itself, you unscrew it to sort of open it and deflate it. You would screw that back in also to make sure it's sealed. and there's a little cap located on the front. Now you want to make sure this is obviously always in place, just so it's a double seal for when the valve's actually sort of shut. You insert your pump directly into it and essentially pump it up. Now, it doesn't actually lock on, it relies on the pressure and the friction kind of in the hole to essentially make sure the pump stays in place. And occasionally in the higher pressures, it can pop off. It's just part of kind of the way it's been designed, but often if it's been put together fairly properly, it should hold in place. So you see this valve often on airbeds, but you know, it's very common in tents. I know, for example, likes of Camper use it, Zempire use it, Vango used to use it. So it's very common in a lot of brands. The next valve which we'll talk about is again a very common valve, and I'm going to refer to this as a dinghy kind of valve. So it's kind of nice, big in kind of diameter. You've got a physical spring button in the middle which you press in to kind of deflate, and when the spring's fully out, it's sort of sealed off. So again, you can open and close it very easily. The cap again is designed to kind of stop any dirt or dust or something getting into the actual valve system. And again, it's a secondary lock. So again, it's a great way of looking at it. Some of these models will actually have a self-regulating valve to it as well. And it's almost worth bearing in mind of looking through the instructions and seeing what PSI your tent is designed to go up to. Typically for tents, it tends to be about 7 PSI. Awnings, it does vary. If it's a caravan awning, it's normally around about 9 PSI, but it does vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. So it's always worth looking at a little handbook you get included with it, just to double check that. The final valve which we're going to talk about is probably it's not as common, basically because it's unique to Vango. So Vango have designed their own kind of valve system, and it's almost attaches like a bayonet fitting. So you can put it in, twist it, lock it on, and similar to kind of the dinghy style valve, you've got a little spring. The only difference is the spring pushes and rotates. So you push it in, rotate it, and then it will stay open. If you want to, obviously, the joys of this in particular is that when you actually insert the pump and take it off, it automatically closes it off. With a dinghy style valve, what you find is you've got to make sure that before you insert the pump, the actual spring is fully out, so the valve is closed. Otherwise, as soon as you undo the valve, all of your hard work and effort comes out of it. And you only make that mistake once, I assure you of that. Other things is also in terms of the pumps you get supplied. Often we'll have pressure gauges as well, so you can dictate what pressure it goes to. Typically a manual pump tends to come with every tent, but you can look at buying an electric pump if you really wanted to. Maybe it can be a little bit slower depending on your system and the valve, but in all, it's a bit more of peace of mind. A common issue we do see with kind of people almost misinterpreting sort of different things on the tent, or the awning. So for the first thing, as we say, on the ground sheet itself, when you open up, it's worth being aware of there's a little patch located in the middle. This is pretty much standard with any tent with a sewn-in ground sheet. The reason for this patch is actually kind of the lug points or fixation points for the inner bedrooms to clip onto. So often they have to physically stitch it onto the ground sheet and then weld a waterproof patch over it and then seal it. So this is a common thing you'll find in most, and it's something to also be aware of. Other things to also kind of be aware of is as the kind of zips go, a lot of them have additional pullers. There's little things you can do to kind of make it a bit more durable and this will stop the material catching in the fabric. So what you find is I like to put my finger directly through kind of the lug or the extra bit of cord, and then you can actually use that to kind of put your finger on the zip and bring it round. This is making sure the zip's not directly feeding into any material, and you're a lot more in control of that process. So that's also a good thing to bear in mind of. And generally, this, certainly from a maintenance point of view, kind of means that it's going to last you longer because there's going to be less problems, it's not going to snag the fabric, and you get a better, longer lifespan out of the actual tent or awning itself. Another question we get commonly asked is about guide points. So guide points, whether it be a kind of storm strap or more of a just a normal guide line, tend to have a correct position to kind of be in. So what you want to do is make sure you kind of follow the seam line directly down and bring it personally out. Personally, I'd say you're better off giving it a wider kind of point than a shorter point, because then it's actually pulling the actual tent or awning out rather than directly down. The guide points are really to stop the actual structure from going in. It's not as well as giving a little bit of tension, but really you want it to be kind of just sort of firm, not too overly tight, again, to keep it in the structural place. Typical thing with guy ropes, as I would say, is that they often do slacks. The first time you actually come to pitch it, what you'll find is when you peg it out, maybe after the next day, they slacken off a little bit or it actually moves. So you want to almost go around your tent or awning around about every couple of days, just to make sure that everything is all tweaked and is pucker. Occasionally you find the pegging points can also move. If you've got windier weather, it's naturally bringing those pegs just kind of out a little bit as well. So that's also worth a look. Other recommendations I would also look is have a look at the pegs. Are they substantial enough for what you need to? It's very common that kind of actually manufacturers will provide sort of fairly decent pegs, but it's always worth having a few extra because you're bound to necessarily bend them or break them along the way some point, and it's better to have than not need than need and not have. That whole kind of getting yourself settled in, I would always have a thought about troubleshooting any problems you've got. We've got a separate kind of problem solving video you can check out and see if there's any kind of common issues that you see with your new purchase. And actually, like I said, it might not so necessarily be something that's an issue. It's just a different way of kind of doing it. So you can always have a look at that. Two things I would always kind of strongly recommend carrying as almost like a bit of an emergency kit is actually a repair kit for one. So there's some really nice kind of repair kits, be it inflatable or non-inflatable, tend to consist of kind of some self-adhesive tape. We call it sort of tenacious tape. It's like a clear plastic adhesive tape. It's brilliant. You can use it on the material, you can use it on the windows, you can use it in the bedroom sections, you can use it on pretty much anything, coats, jackets, so it can be multi-purpose. Often you find sometimes they come with little seam sealers as well, so if you need to kind of cover any leaks or anything that you're getting through that, it's a really handy bit of kit to have. The other thing I would also kind of recommend as kind of a great extra just to nip a problem in the butt is like a spare tube or a spare pole. Be it a small section for a fiberglass, still's a little bit harder, I will say that, but even certainly for like a spare tube for a tent, it's a really great accessory. No different to a spare tyre in your car or for like a bike tyre. Very easy concept to replace, but almost by having it, you ward off the issues. I will say that, to be fair. And often you find that one spare inner tube can pretty much go in any of the actual beams itself. If it's a little bit too long, you can fold it off the end away from where the valve's located. So, and again, we've got separate videos talking about that as well, but it's something to note. And I think for me, it's a really great idea, and I would always kind of have it in like almost like an emergency break glass kit, just because anything it throws at you, or way of campsites being, if anyone else on the campsite has an issue, you can always be kind of their number one friend and neighbour and get it sorted for them. By all means, if you have any more questions or queries regarding anything to do with kind of getting to know your product, we do tend to do some really nice kind of review videos on the items as well and pitching, so you can use that as a bit of a guide to get your tent up and see the best way, or our opinion, our best way of pitching your model as well. So that's always worth a consideration, as well as our other tutorial videos regarding kind of replacing air tubes, pitching tents, solving problems, or even kind of what kit you want. We've also got lots of different videos related to that, so you can always check that out on our YouTube channel. But we'd always, like I said, love to hear from you, so feel free to comment in the box below, like and rate our sort of channel in that sort of sense. But yeah, that's kind of a bit more of an intro into kind of getting to know your new tent or your new awning.